So, we all see the headlines when a massive restaurant chain realizes there's a serious problem with their food, right? But it really makes you wonder, when food actually turns dangerous, how do we measure the real fallout? Well, welcome to our latest explainer. Today, we're putting on our investigator hats to look right past the corporate PR spin and dig straight into the numbers. This whole thing is really about the corporate ledger of accountability. Because when massive, catastrophic failures happen in the food supply chain, companies don't just get to put out a quick apology tweet and move on. There's a very specific, highly regulated way they absolutely must track and report these crises. So let's dive into this explainer and see exactly how this ledger works in practice. Section 1. Tracking the recall ledger. What's genuinely fascinating here is the sheer level of detail required by the SASB standards. Those are the Global Sustainability Accounting Standards. If you look at the food safety block, you're going to see a very specific code, FBRN 250A.2. That specific metric, that's basically our roadmap for this entire investigation, because it dictates exactly what a restaurant has to disclose when things go totally south. But, before we start actually counting the recalls, we need to know what officially triggers one in the first place. The foundation of this standard clearly states that a food safety-related recall is the removal of a marketed product that may reasonably be believed to cause consumers to become ill. So the absolute crucial takeaway here is that we're not talking about food that just doesn't taste great or looks a little bit off. No, this is the absolute baseline trigger for a safety crisis, a reasonable belief of actual human illness. Section 2. Voluntary versus involuntary recalls. Okay, let's start with the absolute worst-case scenario from a compliance perspective, involuntary recalls. These are the ones requested or mandated by legal or regulatory authorities. This basically happens when a product utterly fails to comply with safety standards, has a glaring defect, or even faces import refusal. In plain English, it means government authorities had to step in and literally force the restaurant to pull the food because the company either didn't catch the issue or they just didn't act fast enough. On the flip side of that, we have voluntary recalls. These are initiated by the entity itself to remove products from the market specifically for food safety concerns. So in this scenario, the restaurant company's internal checks, or maybe their suppliers, actually identified the risk, and they proactively self-initiated the removal way before the government ever had to mandate it. And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates the dynamic at play in corporate accountability, government-mandated versus company-initiated. When they're reporting these metrics, the standards specifically note that companies can separately disclose the percentage split between their voluntary and involuntary recalls. And as an investigator, or hey, even as an investor, you absolutely want to know this split. A high percentage of voluntary recalls might actually show a really proactive safety culture. But if you're seeing way too many involuntary recalls, that strongly suggests a company is just constantly reacting to government intervention. Section 3. Measuring the tonnage. Now, to get the full picture, the standard requires dual metrics. It's just not enough to give a simple tally. Companies literally have to report two things. First, the total number of recalls issued, and second, the total amount of food product recalled, specifically measured in metric tons. You need both to understand the true scale. I mean, think about it. You could have one single recall, but if it involves thousands of metric tons of contaminated meat, well, that one incident is a massive operational failure. This dual metric creates a totally watertight net of accountability. Just take a look at the scope column here. The rigor of this standard dictates that a parent company cannot just hide behind its franchisees. The disclosure must explicitly include both entity-owned and franchise locations. So whether a big corporate store or a small local franchise pulls the food, it all goes onto the exact same ledger, strictly measured by both frequency and scale. The total weight in metric tons of food product subject to recalls. I kind of want to pause on the tangibility of this for a second. When we talk about metric tons, we aren't just talking about abstract numbers on a corporate spreadsheet. We're talking about massive physical waste. We're talking about fleets of trucks and the absolute logistical nightmare involved in pulling all of that dangerous food out of the supply chain and destroying it safely. It is a heavy physical metric. Section 4. Investigating notable recalls. So the accounting standard has this very specific threshold for what it calls a notable recall. A recall becomes notable if it affects a really significant number of products, or, and this is where the stakes reach their absolute highest, if it involves actual or potential serious illness or even fatalities. It also triggers if the event is mentioned in periodic jurisdictional recall reports. Once a recall hits this notable status, Well, a simple number and a weight is no longer enough to cut it. Because when a crisis is officially deemed notable, the company must publicly confess to this exhaustive list of details. This right here is the anatomy of a notable disclosure. They have to explain the exact description and the root cause, the total quantity, the actual hard financial cost to remedy the issue. They've got to declare if it was voluntary or involuntary. They must detail the specific corrective actions they're taking, and perhaps most significantly of all, they have to disclose outcomes like legal proceedings or, tragically, customer fatalities. It's a complete, forced, transparent breakdown of a corporate disaster. Section 5. The true cost of safety. As we've seen, looking at this ledger, these metrics aren't just for bean-counting financial losses or adding up metric tons of wasted food. They are ultimately designed to enforce mandatory corrective actions. By forcing these restaurants to publicly detail exactly how they are fixing their broken supply chains, and by tracking the harsh consequences of legal proceedings, these standards are really aiming to ensure that a company actually learns from its failures and prevents future outbreaks. It's all about restoring that lost trust through radical transparency. Which really brings us to our final thought. The very next time you see a news headline about a major restaurant pulling a product, I want you to think about the complex ledger behind it. When you look at those metric tons of recalled food, what do those numbers truly reveal about that restaurant's underlying supply chain? Are they proactively protecting you, or are they just reacting because the authorities forced their hand? I really hope this explainer has given you a powerful new lens for understanding the true weight of food safety. Thanks so much for joining me on this investigation.